All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping right into Alan W. Gomes's highly analytical book, Unmasking the Cults. We're going to see exactly how experts categorize complex and honestly super emotionally loaded words. We hear these terms literally every day, but how often do we actually stop to dissect what they really mean and how they're constructed? Let's establish right out of the gate that Gomes approaches this heavy topic without any of the usual sensationalism. Instead, he uses strict, doctrinally based boundaries to bring some absolute clarity to a pretty murky subject.
Which brings us to a huge question. Why is the word cult so emotionally loaded for us today? I mean, the word instantly brings up wild, sensational images for most of us, right? But how do experts objectively define it without getting dragged down by all that emotional baggage? How do we strip away the drama and just look at the facts and the structure of belief?
To answer that, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, decoding the word cult. Second, a preferred theological definition. Third, key defining features. Fourth, central versus peripheral doctrines. And finally, flaws in sociological definitions. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Decoding the word cult.
Looking at where a word started often shows us just how far it's drifted in popular culture. Surprisingly, the root of this controversial term is just the completely harmless Latin word cultus. It literally just meant to worship or give reverence to a deity. It was a totally general term for worship, no matter what god you were talking about. In fact, it was even used in Old Latin Bible translations to describe the worship of the true God. Crazy, right?
But skip to today, and well, the landscape is completely different. Sociologists point out that the media has really exploited this term over time. Now it's heavily associated with the occult, and our brains immediately go to sensational images of people wearing hoods and doing weird rituals in secret cellars. The unfortunate result of all this media hype? We've totally lost any linguistic precision. The word is basically used as a weapon now instead of a helpful descriptor.
Section 2. A preferred theological definition.
Since the everyday meaning has gotten way too broad and emotional, our source material builds a super precise, doctrinally based definition instead. It lays it out like this. A cult of Christianity is a group of people claiming to be Christian that embraces a particular doctrinal system which explicitly denies one or more of the central doctrines of the Christian faith. Notice how this completely shifts our focus away from weird behavior and puts it directly onto theology.
Section 3. Key defining features. What's great here is we can treat this definition almost like a scientific formula. For a group to fit, there are some really strict boundaries. First, it has to deviate from apparent religion. Second, it's got to be an actual group of followers, meaning it's grown beyond just one guy. Third, it has to explicitly claim to be Christian. Fourth, it needs a unifying doctrinal system. And finally, it has to be taught by a specific leader or organization. All of these pieces literally have to be there.
To make this even clearer, the text draws a hard line between a solo person with unorthodox views and an actual cult group. If you're just one person holding some unorthodox theology, you're simply termed a heretic. A cult, on the other hand, absolutely must gain a following. Whether it's 5 people or 5 million, there has to be that group dynamic.
This also creates a really brilliant boundary of exclusion. Just look at the difference between a cult of Christianity and a world religion. A world religion, like Islam, openly opposes Christianity. It makes absolutely zero claim to be part of it. So not a cult of Christianity. A cult, though, insists it is Christian. In fact, they usually claim they are the only true representation of the faith on earth.
The text also uses a pretty funny example to show what else gets excluded from this label. Picture a secular lodge where members wear moose antlers, blow horns, and play bingo on Thursday nights. Definitely eccentric, for sure. But are they a cult? No way! They are totally excluded because they completely lack a religious doctrinal system. They aren't making statements about God, sin, or salvation. If there's no doctrinal system, it cannot be categorized as a cult.
Section 4. Central versus peripheral doctrines.
So this whole definition really hinges on exactly what kind of doctrines a group is denying. The author meticulously separates the absolute essential beliefs from the non-essentials. Central doctrines are the bedrock, the core beliefs strictly necessary for salvation. But peripheral doctrines, those are non-essential things like exactly how you baptize someone or how a church is governed. Those are areas where totally legitimate orthodox denominations can just agree to disagree without ever crossing into cult territory.
So how does a group actually violate that central theological boundary? Well, they can do it explicitly by just flat out denying a core tenet or publishing materials that add outside texts to the Bible. But they can also do it implicitly, and this is a super sneaky tactic. A group will use perfectly standard orthodox terms so they sound mainstream, but behind closed doors they've secretly redefined what those words actually mean within their own teachings.
Section 5. Flaws in sociological definitions.
This leads us to exactly why the author completely rejects modern sociological definitions. Take Charles Braden's definition, for instance. Instead of theology, sociologists tend to focus way too much on observable behaviors, things like authoritarian leaders, highly regulated lifestyles, and whether the group significantly breaks away from the normal consensus of society.
But our text argues that these sociological definitions are just fundamentally flawed. First off, they are totally relativistic. Society's norms change all the time, right? So what's considered deviant today might be perfectly normal tomorrow. Second, they're highly subjective. They rely on really fuzzy qualifiers, saying a group is somewhat mystical or usually informal. And lastly, by only looking at social behavior, they completely ignore objective standards of orthodox belief.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you pondering a final question. When navigating emotionally loaded terms like this, how does the tension between shifting societal norms and strict theological boundaries fundamentally shape our perception of minority belief systems? It's pretty fascinating to realize that the specific words and frameworks we choose to adopt literally dictate how we understand the world around us. Thanks for hanging out with me to unmask these definitions today, and always keep questioning how the information around you is structured.